All right. Welcome to the last lesson before we get to the bonus and the critical thinking question. So, when you do research for an interview, I honestly think it's the easiest and most straightforward of all research. I wouldn't say it's the least time consuming, but it is certainly the most straightforward. At this time, I'm going to switch over to a presentation so we can go through some talking points. Let's do it. Welcome to the little mini presentation here. We're going to talk about interview show research. I have selected three different podcast episodes to share with you. They are episodes 216, 212, and 209 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Now, if you look at the episode artwork in front of you, these all happen to be women, but the woman on the left and the woman on the right had never, ever been on podcasts before. That's going to play into something that I say a little bit later. However, the girl in the middle, the woman in the middle, has been on more than one podcast. And if you look, she's got a book and she's got a TEDx talk, right? That's also going to play into something that we talk about a little bit later. All right, let's move on. Why do I do research for interview shows? Selfishly, as you can tell from the unicorn there, I want my interviews to be different from other interviews that my guests have been on. I research my guests before our interview so that we can have an interview that is original. Moving on, I want to tell you that I have an angle. You probably know this, but it's going to make even more sense right now as we're talking about research for interview shows. I have an angle. My angle is that my guests use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain so that my listeners feel inspired to use their voices too. Let me say that again because I feel that's super important. My guests use their voices to advocate, educate, or entertain so that my listeners feel inspired. All right, moving on. I use the red thread method. Okay, I find the red thread in whatever I do for my interviews. What does that mean, Kim? All right, I'm just going to kind of read this to you. During my research for my interviews, I connect my guest criteria, that whole advocate, educate, entertain thing, with how the guest will inspire my audience. I find the red thread and then I share it in the introduction and the conclusion of the episode. I'm basically steering my audience so that they understand how this person uses their voice and why I want it to inspire them. So it's all about inspiration. That is what I want the audience to feel. I want them to feel inspired. All right. If you don't know what the red thread is, there is a book about it. And it's not necessarily about interviewing people for podcast episodes. The name of the book is Find Your Red Thread, Make Your Big Ideas Irresistible. This is by Tamsen Webster. The audiobook version is also available. I listened to it and I liked it so much I bought the physical print book. It's a great book. Now, the red thread means it's the through line, the story that connects your idea with your audience's heart and mind. So, what am I talking about here? I am trying to connect the whole advocacy, education, entertainment piece with inspiration. That is my red thread. So, I'm again trying to guide the thought of my audience to see the guest in the same way that I see them. I know that was a little herky jerky when it came out of my mouth, but I hope you get it. And I want to point out that there is such a thing as the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is real. I know my guest because I've researched them. I've maybe met them during a pre interview or at a conference or something. But my audience does not know this person from Adam. They don't know who this is and why they should care. So I need to help my audience see why my guests are advocates, educators, or entertainers so that they will be inspired to use their voices too. I hope that all makes sense. Now, this is just for my podcast and my MO. This does not necessarily match with what you might want to do. But again, this is a behind the scenes course, and I'm sharing with you kind of the recipe for my podcast. What does research for podcast interviews look like? If I don't know this person very well, I'm going to their website. I'm going to look on their social media accounts, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. I also listen to podcast episodes that they've done. If they have a blog, I'm going to read their blog, at least one post. If they have a YouTube channel, I'm going to check it out. Their shorts, their full length videos. If they have written a book, I'm going to at least peruse it on Amazon. If I have time, I will listen to the audiobook. I honestly don't get much time to sit and read. But, anyways, this is what research looks like when I am researching one of my guests for a podcast interview. Research is going to look different depending on the guest. Some guests are easier to research than others. For example, going back to that first slide, I'm going to go back in time here. The woman on the left and the woman on the right both had never, ever been on a podcast interview before. Therefore, I could not listen to previous podcast interviews that they had been on. That part of my research just didn't exist. And the woman on the right does not have her own website. She works for the Public Health Service. So, phs.org is the website that she would refer people to, but that's not her website. So, that research is a little bit different. I can research her parent organization, her employer, but I can't necessarily research her because she doesn't have a business. But in contrast, the woman on the left, Michelle Mosier, PharmD, has her own business. So I could go to her website and I could around at all the different options on the navigation bar, the about section and the services she offers and all the things like that. So this just shows you how guests can be kind of different. And then the woman in the middle, she had all kinds of things that I could research. She has a book. She has an audiobook. I listened to the whole thing. It was very interesting. She's been on other podcast interviews. I listened to some of them. She has a website for her business, We Matter Too. She has a Twitter account that I could check out. There's all kinds of things. Oh, and then of course she's a TEDx speaker. So on YouTube, I was able to pull up the video of her TEDx talk and watch it. So not only did I get to listen to her, I also got to see her. That was really cool. Research looks all kinds of different ways, just depending on what is available. So somebody that works for a startup is going to be some different from someone who's been in business for a while as well. So I'm going to compare Michelle Mosier to Blair Thielemeyer, two totally different women. One's at the beginner end of the spectrum. One's been in business greater than 5 years. So research is going to look different depending on who you are researching. Something that I don't do very often is a pre-interview. Pre-interviews are rare in my world, and it's not because they're not important. People just don't often ask for them, and that is why I don't do many of them. But what does a pre-interview look like? It's often just a 30-minute conversation on my recording software, either Zoom or Squadcast, and it's a meet and greet. It's a get to know you session. Sometimes guests have specific questions, and that's why typically they ask for a pre-interview. Now, they may not know how to set up their microphone and headphones. They may never have used recording software for a podcast interview before. I have a lot of first timers on my podcast. I definitely agree to these pre-interviews because I want them to feel comfortable and I want the best audio quality possible. So pre-interviews, not a problem. Sometimes my guests want to agree on a list of topics or questions, especially if they have a legal department and the legal department requests this. Some people just want to get to know me before we record. They want to make sure that I'm not some crazy person that's going to stick a bunch of commercials for products that they don't agree with in the middle of our podcast episode. They just want to meet me and make sure that I am for real and serious. And I am. I'm a good podcast host. Trust me, good podcast host. Good podcast host. All right. Some people are also curious about the process. Maybe they have limited time available and they just want to know if we're going to stay on schedule. If I say 30 minutes, do I really mean 30 minutes? And the answer is no. If I schedule a podcast interview and I say 30 minutes of recording time, There's going to be pre-interview conversation and post-interview wrap-up. Now, can I stay on schedule if I absolutely have to? Yes, absolutely. But the pre-interview is a great time to talk about that because I want to respect their time and they just want to know about the process. How long does it take? Things like that. Also, sometimes I get specific requests. Sometimes I make specific requests. Sometimes I need the bio, not sometimes, all the time. I need the bio, the links, and the headshot for the guest so that I can create a good blog post or show notes and good episode artwork. But sometimes I have a guest who has a specific request that they want to bring to me before there's any record button getting pressed, okay? They want to make sure for legal reasons that I understand that they can't talk about certain topics. And I won't say which guests have brought these issues forward, but I must say that pre-interviews are a fantastic way to get legal issues out of the way before the actual podcast recording. Because sometimes it puts you on edge when you're talking about legal stuff and what you can't do and what you can do. I like to be relaxed when I come to an interview. When I step up to the mic, I want to get down to business, you know? All right, that does it for pre interviews. That is a form of research that is helpful. Now, as we start to wrap this lesson up, I want to talk about reflecting. So, once you've done your research, you can reflect on what you have learned and find the red thread. For me, I'm trying to figure out how I can connect the whole advocate, educate, entertain piece with the inspiration piece. As I reflect on everything that I've learned, I use all the information to help me create excellent interview questions and form an intro, an introduction, and a conclusion that's going to help the listener bring it all together. I want them to feel inspired and I want them to understand that this person has, for example, advocated for mental health issues or they've advocated for uh, patients. They're a patient advocate. I like to make it very plain and crystal clear because, hey, when you're driving a car and you're listening to a podcast episode, you kind of want somebody to say, this is what you're going to learn. And then through the interview questions, you're teaching them. And in the conclusion, you're wrapping it all up with a nice bow. Now, at this time, at the bottom of the screen, I have something that I just want to read to you. I reflect on everything that I've learned and I develop questions, interview questions that position my guests as thought leaders capable of inspiring my audience to use their voices too. That's a nice wrap up here too. That is what you have learned. All right. And in summary, research and reflection help me find the red thread, write interview questions, and write the intro and the outro for the episode. All right. That's all I've got for this lesson. Let's move on to the bonus.